mysterious drone sightings. They've been buzzing across New Jersey and beyond, really all throughout late 2024. We're talking drones near sensitive sites, whispers of a mothership launching them, and authorities that seem to have more questions than answers. We're going to dive deep into these reports to uncover what's known, what's speculation, and what questions remain unanswered about these unidentified flying objects. So to get started, let's rewind back to mid-November. It seemed like things kind of started with just a few reports, mostly concentrated around Morris County, New Jersey. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Initially, people were spotting these low-flying drones near the Raritan River and Round Valley Reservoir. What's fascinating here is how quickly these sightings spread. They went from a handful of reports to practically being everywhere overnight. We're talking across New Jersey into neighboring states, and even reports popping up overseas in the UK.
Wow, that's a pretty rapid spread. So it wasn't just the sheer number of reports, though, right? It seems like the locations where some of these drones were spotted really started to raise some eyebrows. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. We started seeing reports of drones buzzing near Picatinny Arsenal, which, as you know, is a major military research facility. And then there was even activity reported near Bedminster, home to former President Trump's golf course. That definitely shifted the conversation from, that's weird, to, okay, what's really going on here?
Yeah, I can definitely see why that would make people nervous. And it wasn't just those high-profile locations, right? There was also that incident with the medical helicopter being delayed because of drone activity. That really drove home the point that this wasn't just about some harmless hobbyists out for a spin.
Right, you're absolutely correct. That incident really highlighted the potential for these drones to disrupt critical operations and potentially put lives at risk. And speaking of high-profile encounters, former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan even reported seeing dozens of these drones. They were silently hovering over his home for nearly 45 minutes. Imagine looking out your window and seeing that. It definitely adds a whole other layer to this mystery.
Okay, I have to admit that's starting to creep me out a little. So
Yeah.
we have all these reports. People are understandably getting a little freaked out.
Yeah.
What was the official response at this point? Because it seems like there was a real disconnect between what authorities were saying and what people were actually seeing.
Yes, you're hitting on a key point here. The official response was, shall we say, a bit perplexing. On one hand, you had the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. They were trying to downplay the threat, saying most of these sightings were consistent with lawful flights and that none of these drones had actually entered any restricted airspace.
Okay, so authorities are saying nothing to see here. But meanwhile, you have people like New Jersey Assemblywoman Dawn Fantasia. She's painting a much more unsettling picture. Didn't she describe large, coordinated drones flying with their lights off, clearly trying to avoid detection? That doesn't exactly sound like lawful flights to me.
Exactly, and that discrepancy is one of the most puzzling aspects of this whole situation. Is it simply a case of authorities having limited information, or is there something more they're not telling us? It's a question that's fueling a lot of speculation and distrust. And it really adds to the mystery of what's truly going on here.
It's not just the mixed messages, right? The FAA also stepped in and highlighted all these strict regulations they already have in place for drone flights. They even went as far as enacting temporary flight restrictions over sensitive areas, like Bedminster and Picatinny Arsenal, with violators facing hefty fines and even potentially losing their drone licenses.
Yes, and that's where things get even more complicated. Because even with those regulations in place, enforcing them is a whole other challenge. Drones are small, agile, and can be operated remotely, making them incredibly difficult to track, let alone intercept.
So we're basically playing a high-tech game of cat and mouse, but with potentially serious consequences.
That's one way to put it. And to make matters even more complicated, current counter-drone technology is still in its early stages. There's no easy solution for bringing down a rogue drone without potentially causing collateral damage, or creating even bigger problems.
So you have all this frustration brewing in public that's increasingly concerned, and a real sense that the authorities might not have a handle on this. What happened next? What did those in power do to try and get a handle on this situation?
Well, that frustration definitely led to some strong calls for action. We saw Governor Murphy urging federal agencies to work more closely with local law enforcement, arguing that they need more resources and support to deal with this emerging threat. But then,
Let me guess then. Former President Trump weighed in with a more, shall we say, direct approach.
you guessed it, he suggested rather bluntly that we should just shoot the drones down.
Okay, let's be honest. Shooting them down probably isn't the most practical or legally sound solution, right?
Definitely not. It's incredibly dangerous and not something officials recommend at all. Shooting down a drone in a populated area could have disastrous unintended consequences and potentially create more problems than it solves.
It's like something out of an action movie, but with real-life consequences. So we have a lot of unanswered questions here, a lot of finger-pointing, and some pretty drastic proposed solutions. But what about explanations? Did any theories emerge to try and make sense of what was happening?
Oh, absolutely. And some of these theories were well more outlandish than others. For example, you might remember Representative Jeff Van Dree's claim about an Iranian mothership launching drones off the U.S. coast.
Oh yeah, that one definitely made headlines. But wasn't that theory pretty quickly debunked by the Pentagon?
Yes, it was. But it speaks to the level of anxiety and speculation surrounding this whole situation. People were grasping for explanations, and some were more willing than others to jump to conclusions.
Okay, so if not a rogue Iranian vessel, what other theories were floating around? Because I imagine, given the global climate concerns about China, probably started to surface, right?
You're right on the money. The China connection definitely started making the rounds, especially with reports of similar drone activity popping up in other parts of the world, like Southern California and Germany. People were understandably concerned about potential espionage. Given the rising geopolitical tensions, it felt like a real-life spy thriller was unfolding, but without a clear protagonist or villain.
And that lack of clarity, that sense of not knowing who or what to believe, must have been incredibly unsettling for everyone involved.
It absolutely was. And it's important to remember that this uncertainty wasn't just limited to the public. Even those in positions of power were struggling to make sense of what was happening. And that brings us to what I consider a pivotal moment in this whole saga. The congressional hearing where the FBI was essentially grilled about these drone sightings.
Oh yeah, the one where they basically admitted they had no definitive answers.
Yeah.
That was a pretty big deal, wasn't it?
It was a huge deal. It was a stark reminder that despite all the investigations, all the speculation, we were still no closer to understanding who was operating these drones or what their purpose might be. And to make matters even more unsettling, the details that started to emerge about these drones suggested that we weren't dealing with your average hobbyist toys.
Okay, this is where I start to get really creeped out. What kind of details are we talking about?
Well, for starters, witnesses described drones much larger than any commercially available models, with both rotary and fixed-wing designs being spotted. That suggests a level of sophistication that goes beyond what you'd typically see with off-the-shelf drones.
Okay, that's a little unnerving, but not totally terrifying yet. What else?
Well, there's also the chilling account of a Coast Guard boat being followed by a swarm of these drones.
Yeah.
And then there's the report of over 50 drones allegedly rising from the ocean near Island Beach State Park in a single night.
Imagine witnessing that. It's like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
Okay. Yeah, that's officially creeping me out now. So, what could these details tell us about the potential capabilities and purpose of these drones? Are we talking about sophisticated surveillance technology, coordinated harassment tactics, or something even more sinister?
Those are all very good questions, and unfortunately, we still don't have definitive answers. But these details do raise some important questions about what we're dealing with here. And perhaps even more importantly, they shine a light on how vulnerable we might be to this kind of technology. So it's safe to say that people in New Jersey were understandably on edge at this point, right? Imagine living in a community where unidentified drones are regularly buzzing overhead. You start to feel a real sense of vulnerability of not knowing what's going on or who's watching you.
Absolutely. The feeling of unease was palpable. And it's important to remember that this wasn't just paranoia. People were actively trying to figure this out. They were sharing videos online, comparing notes, and coming up with their own theories. It was almost like a collective effort to solve a mystery that was unfolding right in their backyards.
It's a modern-day real-life episode of the X-Files unfolding in New Jersey. So who's behind these drones? What do they want? Why haven't authorities been able to definitively identify or stop them? And what does it all mean?
Those are the million-dollar questions, aren't they? And unfortunately, we're still searching for the answers.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, this isn't just a local issue anymore. This is a national, even international phenomenon that's raising fundamental questions about our security, our privacy, and our relationship with technology.
It's like we're entering uncharted territory and we're not quite sure what the rules are or who's in control. And that uncertainty is what's making this whole situation so unsettling.
You're absolutely right. And it's important to acknowledge that uncertainty. We don't have all the answers, and that's okay. What's important is that we continue to ask questions, demand transparency from our leaders, and be critical of the information we're consuming. Pay attention to what's happening around you, both in your local community and in the wider world, because the future is being shaped right now, and we all have a role to play in ensuring that it's a future we want to live in.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the mystery of the New Jersey drones. We may not have all the answers, but we've explored the facts, the theories, and the larger implications of this strange and unsettling phenomenon. And ultimately, it's up to you, our listeners, to decide what you believe.
We've given you the tools. Now it's time to use them. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay engaged.
And maybe keep an eye on the sky. You never know what you might see up there.
That's right. The world is full of wonder and mystery, and sometimes the most unexpected things can lead us to the most profound truths.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.